known as the slave dynasty. That is also known as the Mameluke dynasty. Mamluk is a liberated slave, and the same dynasty is known as the Ilbari dynasty. If we take note of this dynasty, this was the dynasty which dominated the whole 13th century except the last decade, when we have the foundation or appearance of a new dynasty known as the Khilji dynasty. This dynasty is associated with, this is chronology. If we take note of the trends, and trends are important because only on that basis we are going to decide which sultan is important. So this dynasty is associated with the foundation of the Delhi Sultanate, and not only foundation but also consolidation of the Delhi Sultanate. This itself can be a PT question. Foundation and consolidation. So now, of all the sultans belonging to this dynasty, we have to take note of only those sultans who played a role in the foundation, who played a role in the consolidation. The people who have nothing to do with the foundation or consolidation, we can simply ignore. So this way we can find out some sultans of this dynasty who can be important for us. The first is, you must be knowing, Kutubuddin Aibak, who is regarded as the founder of the dynasty as well as the founder of the Delhi Sultanate. Second, who is the real founder of Delhi Sultanate, known as Iltutmish, also called Sultan Altamash. His full name was Shamsuddin Altamash. Now their specific chronology is not important. Then we have one more noticeable person in this dynasty. Name was Razia Sultan, and the fourth is Gyasuddin Balban, popularly called Balban. So these four we can take note of while talking about the dynasty that is associated with foundation and consolidation of the Delhi Sultanate, known as the slave dynasty, Ilbari dynasty, or the Mamluk dynasty. This order may also be important. Then we can proceed further to take note of the second dynasty, and the second dynasty is known as the Khilji dynasty. This dynasty ruled for a very brief period of time, but we have profound changes under this dynasty, and that's why those changes constitute what is known as the Khalji revolution. You may have heard of Alauddin Khalji as the chief architect of this revolution. This dynasty somehow 1290, we can say, the last decade and the first quarter of the 14th century. So if we take note of the chronology of this dynasty, roughly, that exact figures are not important. That is towards the end of the, that is last decade of the 13th century, 13th, and the first quarter, major part of the first quarter, not the whole, first quarter of the 14th century, first quarter of 14th century. Now in this dynasty we have three major sultans who can be important. The founder of the dynasty, Jalaluddin Khalji, the chief architect of the Khalji revolution, Alauddin Khalji, made popular also by Bollywood. And the third, just few details about this person, Mubarak Khalji or Mubarak Shah Khalji. Then after this dynasty, and remember the trends associated with these dynasties. If we take note of the trends associated with this dynasty that we have not taken note of, so here this dynasty, Khalji dynasty, is known for this is the first dynasty when we have trends. See, consolidation continued, and expansion. So Delhi Sultanate started expanding under the Khaljis. This itself can be a question, that consolidation and expansion. So here in this dynasty, we have to pay attention to only those rulers who played important role in the consolidation and expansion of the Delhi Sultanate. And here, naturally, the most important ruler is Alauddin Khalji. So some details about Alauddin Khalji we have to take note of. Then the third dynasty, we can say the last major dynasty of this Sultanate is known as the Tughlaq dynasty. Tughlaq dynasty ruled remaining part of the 14th century. That is, we can say till the invasion of Timur, till the invasion of Timur. You may have heard of the Central Asian invader, whom the Mughals considered one of their ancestors. That was in 1398. So this is the period of this dynasty chronology. If we take note of the trends associated, so trends are not associated with consolidation, they are associated with expansion. And it was during the reign of this dynasty that the Delhi Sultanate reached the zenith of its territorial extent. But that zenith itself proved to be counterproductive, and so the dynasty is also associated with decline. So we start talking about the decline of the Delhi Sultanate with the Tughlaqs on the throne. And here we have three rulers who can be important for us. The first is the founder of this dynasty, whose name is Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq. Second is popularly called MBT, Muhammad bin Tughlaq. Third is popularly called FST. At this stage, you are familiar with Firoz Shah Tughlaq and Muhammad bin Tughlaq. So short form can serve the purpose. Now, after these three sultans of the Delhi dynasty, practically speaking, Sultanate was over, but then it had to continue for one more century with some weaker dynasties. The fourth dynasty, just to fill in the gap, is the Sayyid dynasty. Here, no ruler is important and trends are associated with the decline. But just know the chronology. We can say first half of the 15th century, that was dominated by this dynasty with some insignificant sultans of Delhi. And if we take note of the trends associated with this dynasty, so we have nothing revival kind of, we have decline, and that's why this dynasty is not important. But we should know that this dynasty presided over the disintegration or the process of the disintegration of the Delhi Sultanate. And the last dynasty is the Afghan dynasty called Lodi dynasty. And we can say that if we take note of the chronology, so chronology is remaining part, that is till the end, from the middle of the 15th century till the end. Till the end simply means 1526, when we have the invasion of Babur. In this dynasty, three rulers are important, and they are the founder of the dynasty, Bahlol Lodi, his son and successor, Sikandar Lodi, and then the last of the Delhi Sultans, Ibrahim Lodi. So these are the dynasties and important rulers, and importance we have decided on the basis of the tendencies. Delhi Sultanate, the first dynasty, slave dynasty, Mamluk dynasty or Ilbari dynasty, foundation and consolidation of the Delhi Sultanate is associated with this dynasty. Then we have the Khilji dynasty. This dynasty is associated with consolidation and expansion. Tughlaqs, expansion and decline. Sayyids with only decline. Lodis with, if we take note of the trends, Lodis are associated with first a brief revival and then final decline. So these are the Delhi Sultans and the dynasties we can talk about while talking about the Delhi Sultanate. And here we have already taken note of the different dynasties their chronological order, their chronological position, and also the different rulers belonging to these dynasties, and their significance to be determined on the basis of the trends which are associated with the dynasties. Now, this is the list of the tasks. Now, how to go about it? There, we can talk about something. Again, this is part of the strategy, and that strategy, don't pay attention to this, is for the revision only. That is to facilitate and to find out important facts and to facilitate the retention of those facts. So, here, while talking about these dynasties, we can take note of the context in which they acquired the thrones. We can take note of the process of conquest and control. We can take note of the process of consolidation. In consolidation, we can take note of A, external consolidation of Delhi Sultanate, consolidation. Here in external, we can take note of ideological dimension. We can take note of political or diplomatic. These are the things that we should keep in our mind. And third is military consolidation. B, we can say internal. And internal and external cannot be totally separated. Here also we have ideological, here also we have political, here also we have military, but here we have additional, that is institutional. This is the plan we have to keep in our mind while doing the revision, or rather this is the tool we are going to use for our revision. The fourth thing is, after consolidation, we can take note of the policies, and of course in the policies we can take note of revenue system, we can take note of some, see, it was not a modern state, so we don't have many dimensions, but still we can take note of two things: revenue, and the second is, we can say, socio-cultural policies. And then the fifth one is again part of the same, that is, after discussing policies, uh, of course expansion is part of the same, but then we have, this is how we can place things. We can take note of the expansion, then we can take note of the decline, and then we can take note of the legacies. So now see, we have a list of sultans, we have a list of dynasties, and we have a list of the task. About those dynasties and those sultans, we have to know such things. And if we know such things, we can say we have done a comprehensive coverage of the topic that is called Delhi Sultanate, at least in political dimension. And then this scheme, if understood well, can facilitate the memory. I will give you some example. Now let us begin with these examples. Now the topic revision starts now, in terms of details. Let us take note of the sultan whose name was Kutubuddin Aibak, and how we are going to use this scheme. This is also for learning opportunity. Now Kutubuddin Aibak, if we relate it with the context, so context means the Indian situation as well as the situation that had been making in the areas of Central Asia and the West Asia. So there was an institution of slavery, and that institution of slavery was not about personal slaveries. We have political slaves, and these political slaves had just one limitation, that they could not become sultans. Perhaps this institution developed in order to ensure the loyalty towards the sultans. So, if we relate Qutbuddin Aibak, the person who is the founder of the slave dynasty, also considered as the founder of the Delhi Sultanate, so he had been a slave officer of Muhammad Gori, the invader who defeated Prithviraj Chauhan in the second battle of Tarain, fought in the year 1192. Just 1 year earlier, he had been defeated by Prithviraj Chauhan in the first battle of Tarain. So this person, Qutbuddin Aibak, was a slave officer. This is the first thing we can notice about him. I think if you are making notes, you can make notes. Otherwise, since it is part of just revision, so that will serve the purpose. Even if you don't making notes, it's okay. So Qutbuddin Aibak, a slave officer of Muhammad Gori, and he played role in the conquest, also in the control. That can be important for PT. I hope the approach is clear. So he participated in all the major battles fought by his master Muhammad Gori in India, and that includes the first battle of Tarain 1191, the second battle of Tarain 1192. In both these battles, this person participated, and then he also participated in one more battle that Muhammad Gori fought against the ruler of Kannauj, Jaichand, who is at times accused of not supporting Prithviraj Chauhan in the second battle of Tarain because of some personal enmity. Now, those details are not important, what were the causes behind their enmity, but it was very much part of the politics of the time. Rajput estates kept on fighting among themselves, and Jaichand had a conflicting relation with Prithviraj Chauhan. So, after defeating Prithviraj Chauhan in the year 1194, that is 2 or 3 years later, Muhammad Gori came back to fight a battle against Jaichand that is known as the Battle of Chandawar. Chandawar ka battle. Now, in that battle, Prithviraj Chauhan, Jaichand, the ruler of Kannauj, was defeated by Muhammad Gori. So, Qutbuddin Aibak participated in all the major battles, that two battles of Tarain and the battle of Chandawar. Now, his role in the control was that when Gori left after the second battle of Tarain, ensuring his victory in the second battle of Tarain, since he had imperial objectives in India, that he wanted to retain the Indian territories as a part of his empire. In this sense, he was different from Mahmud Ghazni, the invader who had invaded India before him, or at least 2 centuries before him, that is in the first quarter of the 11th century, particularly known for invading the temple of Somnath. So their approaches were different. Mahmud Ghazni is supposed to be interested only in Indian riches, Indian resources, and not in extending the empire towards India. But Muhammad Gori had this intention of extending his empire towards India, and so he appointed his trusted slave officer and the same person, Qutbuddin Aibak, as the person in charge of the Indian parts of his conquest. So he was caretaker and he was participating in controlling the conquered areas as person in charge of these areas. Now in 1206, Muhammad Gori died, and after the death of Muhammad Gori, Qutbuddin Aibak was the person who decided to separate the Indian parts of the Gorian Empire from the politics of Central Asia and the West Asia. While doing so, he had to face the opposition or rivalry of other slave officers of Muhammad Gori. Two of them are particularly noticeable: Tajuddin Yildiz and Nasiruddin Kubacha. These two slave officers you must be knowing, rivals of Qutbuddin Aibak and Nasiruddin Kubacha. Since Tajuddin Yildiz had succeeded Muhammad Gori at Gor, the capital of the empire, he thought that he is the master of all the areas, including the areas under the control of Qutbuddin Aibak. So Qutbuddin Aibak had to deal with these people very diplomatically because militarily he was yet not powerful enough to offer any challenge to them. So he faced the rivalry of the other slave officers. We are talking about Qutbuddin Aibak as consolidating, and consolidation means the conversion of the conquest into an independent political system. So who developed this idea, vision of separating these areas from the Central Asian and West Asian politics? So it was Qutbuddin Aibak. So that's why he is remembered as the founder. So he was a slave officer who participated in all the battles, became in charge of the Turkish conquest of India, and after the death of Muhammad Ghori, tried to consolidate independent status of Delhi Sultanate. While consolidating, of course, he hardly found time for proper consolidation. He just lived 4 years, but still he made some moves. For example, here, external consolidation, ideological consolidation. That person, since he had been a slave officer, so according to the Central Asian and West Asian tradition, a slave officer was not entitled to become sultan. And since he had that kind of intention, as part of the consolidation of his moral and ideological position on the throne of the Delhi Sultanate that he was contemplating, he secured his liberty from slavery from a distant relative of Muhammad Ghori. So, attainment of freedom from slavery was part of ideological consolidation. See, this way we are not going to miss any point, important point. Then, about political and diplomatic consolidation, these slave officers were handled by him politically and diplomatically because at such an early stage he was not able to offer military resistance. So, when Tajuddin Yildiz made claims on the Indian territories, he did not resist it. He accepted some of the gifts given by him, some of the symbols of sovereignty sent by him. But he was militarily ready also, and he shifted his headquarters to Lahore. So, headquarter of Qutbuddin Aibak, Lahore. This can be a very important question because from Lahore he thought he will be able to keep a closer watch on the border areas. Internally, like externally, he could not find much time. Internally, also, he could not find much time. So, he could not develop the institutions of the Delhi Sultanate. But here also, of course, this ideological, that is freedom from the slavery, was going to help him here also as part of the internal consolidation. Mainly, such things were meant for the nobility because it was the nobility which had the capacity to challenge the position of the throne and no one else. And nobility also belonged to the same part of the world where we have the predominance of so-called Islamic theories of politics. Though in Islam we do not find the system of monarchy, but it was less about theoretical position. It was more about practical situation that had been emerging in that part of the world. So he here internally developed an image of a generous king or of a generous ruler. And you must be knowing that this person, Qutbuddin Aibak, became famous as Lakh Bucks, the one who makes donations in lakhs. So, who of the Delhi Sultan is known as Lakh Bucks? So, Qutbuddin Aibak, and that was part of this ideological consolidation. If we take note of the political consolidation, he presented himself as a champion of the interest of the Turkish race. So, the new ruling class was quite cosmopolitan. We find different races. One such race was the Turkish race. So, in order to consolidate his position, he presented himself as a champion of the Turkish race. That was again part of the political consolidation. Regarding military consolidation, he is known for what we can say suppressing many revolts and rebellions of the indigenous rulers as caretaker and also as a new aspirant to the throne. Institutionally, he was not able to do much because he died, and he died because of falling from a horse, perhaps while playing a game that was a version of modern polo in the medieval time, Chaugan. So, after his death, of course, now it was Iltutmish who is going to accomplish these tasks, and that's why it is said the real founder was Iltutmish. But before we shift to Iltutmish, let us talk about his policies. But here he could not do anything in revenue. His socio-cultural policy is also not very clear because at this time it was just the beginning of the Delhi Sultanate. He had no role in expansion, he had no role in decline. But of course, we have something about the legacies. So, here this legacy can be particularly seen in the field of architecture. In Delhi, there is a place, there is a site that is known as Qutub complex. Some of you may be knowing. And the Qutub complex is known for some structures like Qutub Minar. So he started the construction of the Qutub Minar. Of course, he could not live to see its completion. So that structure later on was completed by Iltutmish. And since we are talking about Qutub Minar, we can also talk about all the rulers who were associated with the Qutub Minar or somehow who came to be associated with the Qutub Minar. So Qutbuddin Aibak started the construction, Iltutmish completed, and around 1366 or 67, when the Tughlaqs were ruling over the Sultanate, and at that time Firoz Shah Tughlaq, who is particularly known for taking interest in architecture, was the Sultan. He is also known for a public works department. So at that time, due to lightning, the structure that is known as Qutub Minar was damaged. Its upper story was damaged. So who repaired the Qutub Minar due to which had received damages due to lightning? So Firoz Shah Tughlaq of the Tughlaq dynasty. And while repairing, the top story was replaced by two smaller stories with the use of marble. So earlier Qutub Minar had been a four-story structure. Later on, it became a five-story structure. Who added the additional story? So it was Firoz Shah Tughlaq. So now, how many sultans are associated? Qutbuddin Aibak, whom we are talking about presently, Iltutmish, whom we are going to talk about, and Firoz Shah Tughlaq. These three rulers are associated with Qutub Minar in different capacities. Come back to Qutbuddin Aibak. In the same premise, you will find a structure which is known as Quwwatul Islam Mosque. I am erasing his name, but you should keep in mind that we are talking about Qutbuddin Aibak. The name of that mosque is Quwwat, that is also called Qubbat, Qubbatul Islam. That is perhaps meaning is power of Islam. Quwwat is Taqat. Now that mosque was a hasty improvisation of the building materials obtained from the destroyed structures in the vicinity, most of the time Hindu and Jaina temples. If you visit today the Qutub complex and you see the mosque, you will see that most of the time temple pillars have been doubled to secure the height that was required. And what is the significance of this structure? That of course was a hasty improvisation. It does not reflect the fine aspects of Indo-Islamic architecture that was to take shape later on. But it is important for being the first structure constructed by the new rulers in India. And that was a mosque. They instantly or immediately needed some places of prayers, and this mosque was built. And who built this mosque? The same person whose name is Qutbuddin Aibak. Then there is a place, Ajmer. Ajmer, which had been the capital of Prithviraj Chauhan, that was now under Turkish occupation. So at Ajmer, the same person, Qutbuddin Aibak, built another mosque, and that mosque is known as Adhai Din Ka Jhopda. So who built Adhai Din Ka Jhopda? In English, lightly you can say it a hut of 2.5 days, but this is not how the names are translated, but just for the sake of understanding. So Adhai Din Ka Jhopda at Ajmer, and Adhai Din Ka Jhopda is a mosque. And who built this mosque? So this mosque was built by Qutbuddin Aibak. That again was part of what we can say some old structure, perhaps a Buddhist monastery, that was converted into a mosque at Ajmer. Qutub Minar in Delhi is named not after Qutbuddin Aibak, but after a very famous Sufi saint of the time, a disciple of famous Moinuddin Chishti of Ajmer. Name was Qutbuddin Bakhtiyar Kaki, whose shrine you can still find near Mehrauli, near Qutub complex, Mehrauli. Qutub complex is a World Heritage Site also. So these are some legacies related to Qutbuddin Aibak. I think this much is sufficient about Qutbuddin Aibak. So in short, what about Qutbuddin Aibak? A slave officer of Gori, participating in conquest, being in charge of the conquest, developing ambition to found a new political entity, but hardly finding time for consolidation, still acquiring freedom from slavery, dealing the rivals diplomatically, shifting the headquarter Lahore, earning the image of lakh bucks, that is a generous leader, developing friendly relation with Turkish nobles, influential Turkish nobles, in the name of championing the cause of Turkish nobility, suppressing revolts and rebellions. Nothing significant here because it was not the time yet. Here also, there is no question at this point of time of expansion of Delhi Sultanate. We have noted in the earlier scheme that the expansion started under the Khaljis and it was part of the Khalji revolution and not before that. Legacies: Qutub Minar, Qutul Islam Mosque, and Adhai Din Ka Jhopda at Ajmer. This much about this person whose name is Kutubuddin Aibak. See how this scheme can help us in retention. Just keep these things important in your mind and just it will be fill in the blank kind of things. Now the next Sultan we are going to talk about, you can see the list that we made is Iltutmish. Now everything is going to be about Iltutmish till we change the topic or change the Sultan. So if you relate Iltutmish with that context, so like Muhammad Ghori, even Iltutmish had been a slave of like Kutubuddin Aibak, even Iltutmish had been a slave of Muhammad Ghori, but it is generally said that he had acquired his freedom during the lifetime of Muhammad Ghori. That is, even before Aibak acquired his freedom, this person had been freed by his master Muhammad Ghori. He too, like Qutbuddin Aibak, participated in all the major battles and also played a role in controlling, because when Aibak was person in charge, he was serving under Aibak and he was Iqtadar of Badaयूं. Badaयूं was the most famous Iqta. Today, Badaयूं is a district in UP. So as such, he played role. Then he is remembered as the real consolidator of the Delhi Sultanate because externally and internally, both way, he took some important measures. Now here, if we take note of ideological consolidation, externally, he obtained something that is called Mansur. Mansur was a letter of investiture. This is how it can be translated. So this itself is important. What was Mansur? Mansur. So Mansur, a letter of investiture that was obtained from the Caliph. The Caliphs of Baghdad had already been destroyed by the Mongols, but still this position was claimed by some of their descendants. And after the disintegration of the so-called Arabic or Islamic Empire in that area, we have emergence of powerful monarchies headed by sultans. But these sultans developed what we can say a strategy to acquire Mansur, that was letter of investiture from the Caliph, and this letter did not mean that the sultans or sultanates were under the Caliph. It simply meant that they are now recognized as sovereign or independent ruler. It is something like today that if a nation becomes member of UN, that is not about accepting the control of UN, that is simply about claiming the position of equality, that everyone is acquiring the same. So I am also at par with others because I have also the same document. So he acquired Mansur from the Caliph. Then politically and diplomatically, he was a master of diplomacy, and UPSC has asked question on his diplomacy that this time Mongols were destroying all the major empires of Central Asia and West Asia. Delhi was saved by the Delhi Sultans. That is long a story. Time wise, we can discuss this also. But Mongol threat appeared for the first time. This itself is a question. During the reign of Iltutmish. So Changiz Khan, none other than Changiz Khan, destroyed an empire in Central Asia. That empire was known as the Empire Khwarizmi Empire. And there was a prince of that empire whose name was Jalaluddin Mangbarni. Now this Jalaluddin Mangbarni was being chased by Changiz Khan, and he reached up to the river Indus, and more, no, what we can say, interestingly, he demanded shelter from Iltutmish, who had acquired the throne and who was just trying to consolidate his position. So now see the situation. If shelter given, that amounted to inviting Changiz Khan to invade the incipient Delhi Sultanate, which was still in its infancy or incipient stages. And if shelter not given, then this person, Jalaluddin Mangbarni, too had the capacity to destroy the Sultanate. So if someone is being chased away or chased by Changiz Khan, none other than Changiz Khan, you can understand the power and significance of that person. So he used diplomacy, and this is what we say. First threat of Mongol invasion appeared during the time of Iltutmish. He politely denied, politeness is part of diplomacy. He politely denied the shelter to Jalaluddin Mangbarni, citing the harsh climate of Delhi as the reason. It was, no, this is not, but attitude was something like this, ki, sir, you can come, but here, climate is not favorable to you. So Jalaluddin Mangbarni too had been a ruler or diplomat. He understood the message. He did not come to India, and this way he avoided relying upon his diplomacy, the invasion of Changiz Khan. That was part of his diplomatic consolidation. Externally, military consolidation was very important. Remember those two rivals of Kutubuddin Aibak, Tajuddin Yildiz and Nasruddin Kubacha. Both of them were defeated by this person and killed also. Nasruddin Kubacha was drowned in the river Indus. So, this is how he eliminated the threats, future threats on the Delhi Sultanate. Now we can easily understand why this person is known as the real founder of the Delhi Sultanate. Then militarily, of course, we have just seen. Now, if we take note of his measures towards internal consolidation, so here internally he again, like Kutubuddin Aibak, presented himself as a champion of the Turkish race, and of course Mansur, which he had acquired here, was also going to help in consolidating his position internally. This and this cannot be completely separated. So here he presented himself as the champion of the Turkish race. If we take note of political consolidation internally, you must be knowing that he made a group of 40 nobles, 40 Turkish nobles, and these Turkish nobles are called Turkane Chihalgani. Turkane Chihalgani, or in a more simplified version, Turke Chalisa. So, who is known for organizing a group of famous Turkish nobles around him, known as Turke Chalisa, known as Turkane Chihalgani. So, it was Iltutmish, and this was part of his internal consolidation, political consolidation. Is this clear? Turke Chalisa, Turkane Chihalgani, this word you may be knowing. I hope understand the significance of this strategy for revision. You have this scheme and we can revise every Delhi Sultan depending upon the trends. Here also he is known for suppressing many revolts and rebellions, and he had virtually to reconquer Bengal. But here those kind of names of provincial governors are not asked, so I am not trying to overburden you. But what is important here is he, while suppressing the revolts and rebellions of the defeated Indian powers, he made a dash into the Malwa region that was totally unexplored areas by Muhammad Gori or Kutubuddin Aibak. And in that area, this person, Iltutmish we are talking about, he also looted and plundered the famous temple of Mahakal at Ujjain. So if the question is ki who of the following Delhi Sultans known for looting and plundering the temple of Mahakal, so that was Iltutmish. Then if we take note of institutional consolidation, so this person is known for organizing what is known as the ICTA system for the first time. ICTA system is identified as the bureaucracy of the Delhi Sultanate, and it can be compared with the previous feudal order. Here in the ICTA system, we do not have hereditary tendencies, and it was just pleasure of the Sultan to appoint anyone as Iqtadar. But of course, he appointed those people who had been traditionally associated with him and had been a part of the respected Turkish or respected families of the nobles. So reorganization of Iqtadari system, it cannot be called provincial system. Now this system, something about this system, that this system was based on what is known as territorial assignment. That division of the conquest. Suppose an area is conquered, that area is, I will give you example here. I hope this part of board is visible. This is the total area of Delhi Sultanate. So this area, one part of this is called Khalisa, that was directly under the Delhi Sultan. And these areas were divided among famous nobles, bigger, smaller both. The big nobles were called amirs. They were also called mukti. They were also called wali. These were the terms amirs, mukti, M-U-Q-T-I, mukti, and wali, used for the big iqtidars. We can have a smaller also, like this way. Now, what is the difference between this system? So, in old feudal system, territories were given, but territories were given in perpetuity by the Indian rulers, beginning with Satavahanas. You may have heard of in the ancient time. But here, territorial assignment was made not with hereditary rights and no sovereign right transferred. In case of feudalism, even sovereign rights were also transferred. So, no transfer of sovereignty, no donation in perpetuity. These iqtidars were personally responsible towards the Sultan, who controlled a part of the empire known as Khalisa, and they just managed these territories on behalf of the Sultan. They perform some duties with respect to these territories. What kind of duties? So they are responsible for defense from external enemy, from internal both. They appropriated taxes imposed by the Sultan. Since they had no sovereign power, they could not impose taxes. That was part of the system. Taxes imposed by the Sultan, appropriated by the Iqtadars, and after meeting the cost of civil and military administration, or maybe if there is any military expedition, the remaining areas known as Fawazil, they can ask you what was Fawazil. That is surplus, balance, that was to be deposited into the central treasury. And they received salaries from the central treasury, and they could not leave these iktas for their successors. These iktadars were transferable also. A is serving as iktadar here, can be transferred here, can be transferred here. So ikta was transferable position. So holding territories for the fulfillment of some responsibilities towards those territories as a part of a system of territorial assignment without hereditary rights, without sovereign rights, is known as the ICTA system. And this ICTA system was part of or evolved as the bureaucracy of Delhi Sultanate. Now, with time, we have deterioration also. When we have weaker rulers, the Iqtadars started claiming hereditary positions. Transfers became difficult. They started emerging as autonomous, that is, decentralizing tendencies, and that is known as the decline of the Iqta system. That is also responsible for the decline of the Delhi Sultanate. So when we have strong rulers like Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq or even Muhammad bin Tughlaq or Alauddin Khalji before them, the Iqta system functioned quite smoothly. Iqtadars were frequently transferred. Fawazil was regularly deposited, and loyalty to the Sultan also ensued. But when we have weak rulers, for example, like Firoz Shah Tughlaq later on, who was also willing to make compromises, so then the Iqta system started developing decentralizing tendencies, also held responsible for the decline. So I hope the Iqta system is clear. In short, Iqta system, part of the bureaucracy of the Delhi Sultanate, first systematized by Iltutmish. It was a system based on territorial assignment. Territories were assigned to important nobles, but these assignments were neither hereditary nor carried any sovereign rights. And these nobles, bigger ones known as Amir Mukti Wali, were to perform some duties while being personally responsible towards the Sultan, and those duties were related to managing administration, appropriating taxes, depositing fawazil, and defending the territories from both internal and external enemies. In the feudal system, things had been different. There in the feudal system, a territory once donated forever, and donated also with sovereign rights. So this was Ikta was an instrument of centralization, like modern bureaucracies. But in the feudal system, you must be knowing that there was always a case of decentralization. So this institutionally, we have talked about this person. We are talking about Iltutmish as part of the plan that we have made for us. Now, if we take note of the policies of this person, so he could not manage time to reorganize the revenue system. So here we do not have major contribution, but of course, he found time to reorganize the currency system of Delhi. And the typical currencies of Delhi, I think one day we talked about coinage also as part of our revision. Tanka, made of silver, and Jital, made of copper. These two typical coins of Delhi Sultanate were introduced by Iltutmish. That is part of his policies, not revenue, but of course monetary or a coinage system. His socio-cultural policy is supposed to be quite liberal. He refused a proposal made by the ulemas. Ulemas always interested in proselytization or a spread of Islam. So when they approached him for a state patronage to their proselytizing activities, Iltutmish did not even meet them personally, and his wazir Nizamul Mulk Junaidi answered them, and the answer was very simple: कि in India we cannot follow the same approach. This is the essence which earlier the Muslim invaders followed towards the cultures and civilizations which had been quite weak or marginal. While dealing with cultures like Persia, Iran, and India, they had to change their policies. And of course, it was no longer about proselytization, at least in the scheme of Iltutmish. And this was declared by his minister as neither possible nor desirable. That Hindu faith is very strong here. We cannot move the Hindus. And more importantly, here our duty is to rule and not to work for religious conversions. But naturally, ulemas were always interested in that. Now it was up to the Delhi sultans how much space was allowed or conceded to these ulemas. So, except one sultan whose name is Firoz Shah Tughlaq later on, no other sultan is known for extending patronage to the ulemas or giving consent to their plans whenever they presented. Then his liberal outlook is also reflected in this person appointing Razia Sultan, his daughter, as his successor. He had appointed him. And this was going against the political traditions and conventions of the Islamic world. I am not saying Islam. What is the position of women in Islam and whether women can be ruler or not? This kind of question they are not going to ask you because they belong more to theology. But here, what we find is that this kind of practices we do not find in the Islamic world. Going against those traditions, he appointed his daughter Razia Sultan as his successor. Then, naturally, his role in expansion we cannot expect, his role in decline we cannot expect, but of course, he had some legacies. And when we talk about his legacies, few of them we have already talked about, that he completed the construction of the Qutub Minar. And do you remember the mosque? We also discussed it. That was Quwwatul Islam Mosque. That mosque was also expanded by this person. One more sultan who is associated with expansion of that mosque of the Qutub complex known as Quwwatul Islam Mosque. I hope you have not forgotten it. That was built by, or that had been built by Qutbuddin Aibak. So this person is known for expanding So completing the Qutub Minar and expanding the Quwatul Islam Mosque. Then this person is also known for uh, a water tank. The cities of Delhi always faced water crisis, and that is known as Hauze Shamsi. Shamsuddin Iltutmish was his full name. So Hauze Shamsi, Hauz, that is water tank or talab. Hauze Shamsi. Then he also built a mosque that was perhaps for Friday prayer, so known as Jami Masjid. But these are just minor things. Something significant we find when we have a very great scholar of the time writing a book, writing a book that is, we can say, the first history book of the Delhi Sultanate. First history book of the Delhi Sultanate, not the first literary work. And some of you may be knowing about this person whose name is Minhaj Siraj. Minhaj Siraj, a great scholar of his time. Now, Minhaj Siraj is known for a book written known as Tabqate Nasiri. Tabqate Nasiri. Nasiri word is derived from the name Nasiruddin. Nasiruddin was one of the sons of Iltutmish, whom Iltutmish thought to be very talented, and perhaps Iltutmish was particularly attached with him. But that person died during his lifetime. So this scholar, who was patronized by Iltutmish, Minhaj Siraj, wrote a book Tabqate Nasiri, and this book we can see as the first historical account, writing with canons of history writing of the early days of the Delhi Sultanate. That's why this person is important, and Iltutmish, of course, is going to be important because of this. Now, Iltutmish also established a madrasa in the honor of his deceased son, that is known as Madrasa, and all these structures were part of the Qutub complex. Madrasa Nasiriya. So, who established Madrasa Nasiriya? It was Iltutmish, and who was appointed as the head or the principal of this madrasa. So, the same great scholar of the time who is the author of Tabqate Nasiri. So, remember Minhaj Siraj, remember his work, remember this madrasa, and remember the connection of Iltutmish with all these three. Then this person was, whose name was Nasiruddin, son of Iltutmish, a prince whom perhaps Iltutmish had in his mind to be his successor. And it was only after the death of this person that Iltutmish appointed Razia as the heir. So he built his tomb, that is known as Tomb of Sultan Gari. Tomb of Sultan Gari. That is in Delhi, near Qutub complex. And this tomb is the tomb of Sultan Prince Nasiruddin, the same person in whose honor Tabqate Nasiri was written and the Madrasa Nasiriya was founded. This is the first tomb of Delhi Sultanate. This is the historical significance of this, and that was built by Iltutmish. Iltutmish also built his own tomb, and that is part of the Qutub complex. And it is historical significance of that tomb is that in the tomb of Iltutmish, we have the earliest experiment of constructing a true dome. Though the dome is no longer extant, it is demolished. Today, this is a roofless structure, but in the corners we find in architecture what are called squinches. And because of this, a guess is made, and that is what? That this structure perhaps was the first structure which contained a true dome. For the time being, just know that there are domes which are known as true domes and scientific domes. This is not time for explaining what kind of domes are true and what kind of domes are false. This much about Iltutmish. Iltutmish is over. See how we are using these concepts. Now, if we take note of the next Sultan, Razia. So Razia had been appointed as the heir, but due to court intrigues, she could not acquire the throne by the virtue of this appointment. But later on, she managed the throne relying upon her military genius and political acumen. It means this much political space was available even in the medieval time for a woman to orchestrate her succession to the throne. So she acquired throne on the basis of her personal virtue, and this is also a very remarkable thing about her accession to the throne, and that is the people of Delhi. We do not know exactly how big was the city and what was the population, and whom we call people of Delhi, whether original inhabitants of the city or the Turkish migrants and invaders. But the people of Delhi supported Razia, and there is some measure of mass support in her accession to the throne. This is a very remarkable thing in the medieval context. Exact years are not important, just know the order. So, Razia Sultan acquiring the throne with the help of the people of Delhi. She had been appointed as heir apparent but could not acquire throne because of this. That is part of the context. Now, if we take note of Razia and her role in conquest, so naturally, the early conquest had already been made, and now before consolidating the position of Delhi Sultanate in the north, future conquests were not to be made till the rise of Alauddin Khalji to the power. So there is a long gap, so we cannot talk about conquest and control. But when we take note of this consolidation, that here consolidation of the Sultanate also meant consolidation of the position of the Sultan on the throne. It was really very difficult to distinguish between Sultan and the Sultanate. So if the position of Sultan is strong, then Sultanate is strong, vice versa. So here, now the biggest challenge to her position came not from only the orthodox sections of the society, but from the group of 40. Do you remember her father had made the group of 40? Now, this group of 40 had acquired much power and influence during the reign of Iltutmish. Now, these people were not willing to accept the domination of Razia, to whom Razia was just a kid of a person who had been very friendly, and these Turkish nobles enjoyed lot of influence and respect when Iltutmish was the Sultan. So they were not going to consent to her domination, but of course they had accepted her. But they wanted her to use as their puppet, but she was not interested in that. So she, in order to counterbalance the influence of the group of 40, she started making efforts to develop a rival group. And in that rival group, she started associating the Abyssinian nobles. Abyssinian noble. Abyssinia is modern Ethiopia, that is in Africa. So people from Ethiopia were there. They had been part of this, a small part of the Turkish nobility. So Abyssinian nobles started receiving encouragement from Razia Sultan. What was her intention? She wanted to consolidate her position on the throne. So ideologically, of course, she was very weak, because Minhas Siraj, the same person, writes in his book, that is Tabqat-e Nasiri, Razia has all the qualities required by a ruler or required by a sultan. But then he says also, and that too quite lamentingly, ki alas, she is a woman. So though Iltutmish had accepted, but of course that was not the modern time. In modern time also we have patriarchy, so you can think of the medieval time and the attitude of the people. So, but still, had Razia accepted to act as puppet, she would not have been opposed by the group of 40, because these people are also politicians. But she started developing a rival group, and among the Abyssinian nobles of the time, there was a person whose name was Malik Yaqut. And Malik Yaqut was given a very influential position in the Delhi Sultanate, and that position was Amir Akhur. You must have heard of this office. Amir Akhur was the head of royal astabal. When this was this appointment was made, now the discontent of the group of 40 came to the fore, and they started raising objections to her position on the throne, not only on the religious ground now that was revived by them, but also on the ground of she having acted as immorally, having some illicit kind of relation with Malik Yaqub. So there were rumor mongering a lot, and of course Razia was ruling like a man in men dresses. She started regularly attending the court. So all these things invited the attention of her rivals. And in fight against women, the most important weapon is in a male dominated society, uh, her character, that is character assassination. So finally there was a revolt against her, and in that revolt we have some persons playing very important role. We have Al Tunia, we have Atigin. See the names. These names are not appearing like Indian names. Al Tunia, Atigin, and the same Nizamul Mulk Junaidi, who had been wazir of her father Iltutmis, who had replied the ulemas. And then there was one more lady. That lady was a widow of Iltutmis, Shah Turkan. See the role of women. Now these four came together, joined hands together, and there was a revolt against Razia, and that revolt was successful, and Razia was imprisoned in the fort of Tabar Hind. Tabar Hind is modern Bhatinda, right? It Bhatinda also. Modern Bhatinda, strategically located. Even today, we have military center there. And the in charge of this fort was Altunia. Now she married Altunia. It was a diplomatic kind of marriage. That she married one of her enemies, and both of them proceeded towards Delhi in order to recover the position. But on the way, they came to be killed by. We exactly don't know who were the killers. Some say her brother, who had in the meantime acquired the throne, sent some assassins, or maybe simply band of robbers, not realizing whom they are killing. So even the location of her shrine is something very disputed kind of location. This way ended the story of Razia Sultan. Her life was spent in a struggle against the Turke Chihalgani or Turke Chalisa, the body created by her father. See, the sultans always had some conflicting relation with the nobility, and different sultans came to follow different approaches for the consolidation of their position. Iltutmis befriended them. Razia wanted to promote a rival group in order to counterbalance their power, and we know the consequences. Here, the interesting things are Shah Turkan, role of Shah Turkan, a widow, role of Razia in medieval politics, and that too in the early days of the Delhi Sultanate. Role of Turke Chalisa in overthrowing Razia. Now, the next Sultan, if you see the list, is Balban. Now we can place Balban also on the same. Now, if we take note of the context of the Balban, so Balban had been part of Turke Chalisa. Do you remember Turke Chalisa? The same group. And after Razia, he acted as the de facto ruler for around 20 years. When another ruler of the same name, Nasiruddin, was placed on the throne, so he was acting as de facto ruler. One of Turke Chalisa. So when after the death of Razia, Turke Chalisa came to dominate, their leader was this person whose name is Gyasuddin Balban. Now this person, Balban, head of Turke Chalisa, acting as de facto ruler, a special post was created for him, and that was Nayab. Nayab is deputy. Nayabe Sultanate or Nayabe The same post is also called Naibe Mamlikat, affairs of the state. Naib is deputy. So, as deputy to the Sultan, he acted for around 20 years. And the name of the Sultan, who was just a puppet in his hand, and also his son in law. People doubt that he poisoned him because he was growing old and he was in hurry of occupying the throne of Delhi. Whatever be the case, such kind of things are not unthinkable in the contemporary context. So this way Balban acquired the throne, having served as Naib Sultanate or Naib Mamlikat, or as a de facto ruler, and as head of the Turke Chalisa. Again, his name is not associated with conquest and control because this time was not favorable for expansion. So, no fresh conquest. But he is particularly known for consolidation and consolidation both internally as well as externally. So, now the details we are talking about belongs to the Sultan whose name is Balban. Externally, ideologically, nothing important. Politically, nothing important. Yes, military consolidation. That first Mongol invasions, actual first Mongol invasion, right? Simple spelling. Mongol invasion. Mongol, Mongol. This way also it is written. First Mongol invasion took place during his time, and he adopted a defensive approach. That he strengthened the frontiers, repaired the old forts, constructed new forts, and developed a tradition of appointing the most famous and most notable commanders in the border areas. And his policy remained quite successful. That Mongols kept on making their incursions into the Indian territories, but they were never capable of what we can say completely destroying the Delhi Sultanate, and their intrusions just proved to be a temporary intrusions. So his policy is defensive. Now, one best commander was Prince Muhammad. Prince Muhammad was son of this person, Balban, and he is important because he lost his life while fighting against the Mughals. Again, not the Mughals, but Mongols. And this person was also the first patron of Amir Khusro. Amir Khusro, you must be knowing, a disciple of Nizamuddin Aulia and a very important personality of the medieval time. He witnessed the reigns of, we can say, around 1 dozen sultans, but his earliest patron was this Prince Muhammad, and his main patron was Alauddin Khalji later on. So, military consolidation. Then he suppressed internal revolts and rebellions. In his case, this ideological, internal ideological consolidation is more important. So, first let us take brief note of here, and then we can shift to here. So, here he was not a politician, he was basically a military leader. So, internally military consolidation, he established for the first time a military department. So, for the first time, military department of the Sultanate was established by Balban, and that was called that is Diwane. Diwan is department. Diwane Arz. So, what was Diwane Arz? That was military department. Who established it? Balban established it, became the first Sultan, Diwane Arz, and that was placed under an officer who was called Ariz. So Ariz was not commander in chief. Commander in chief was Sultan himself, but he maintained this military. He was also called Arize Mamalik. Mamalik is for the Sultanate. Arize Mamalik. Arize Mamalik. So military department. We are talking about Balban as part of our revision. Then here in institutional consolidation, he made some changes in the ICTA system, that he wanted to revoke the revenue free land grants, of course, not on hereditary basis, but also known as, in the case of Delhi Sultanate, known as milk, 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 inam, idrar. This terminology may be important. They were basically charitable grants without hereditary rights, without sovereign rights. So, in order to strengthen the finances of Sultanate, he wanted to confiscate these land grants, and he was forbidden, or he was persuaded rather, by his friend and Kotwal of Delhi, Malik Fakhruddin. His name is important because Balmer was despotic enough to ignore anyone, but he had friendly relation with the Kotwal of Delhi, and Kotwal of Delhi persuaded him not to do so. But he appointed Khwajas. Again, Balban appointing Khwajas. These Khwajas were accountants, and these Khwajas were appointed to scrutinize the accounts of the Iqtadars. Do you remember Iqtadari system? That Fawazil was to be deposited. So they were there to scrutinize how much realization was made, how much is spent, and how much is deposited into the central treasury as part of Fawazil. So the term Khwaja is very popular. Khwaja term is, the meaning is accountant, and who appointed Khwajas for the first time? It was Balban as part of his internal institutional consolidation. Now come back to this one. As I told you, we left it because this requires some special treatment. That is internal consolidation, and that too ideological consolidation. Here he is known for his theory of kingship. And quite interestingly, this person, while developing his theory of kingship, was not relying upon the Islamic principles or traditions of the so called Islamic world. He was relying upon the Persian tradition, and that too pre Islamic Persian traditions. So, this is also a very interesting thing, that a ruler, a Muslim ruler, while developing his theory of kingship, is not using Islamic principles and the notions prevalent in the Islamic world for his theory of kingship. So his theory of kingship was associated with, influenced by Persian tradition, that it came to be relied upon Persian tradition, that is pre-Islamic Persian. Pre-Islamic heroes celebrated by very famous author, whose name is very important in India also. You must be knowing about a book known as Shahnama. That author of Shahnama, I'm not able to recall his name. That is tip of the tongue phenomenon. I will be uh, leave him. So it is not about that person. It is about pre-Islamic Persian tradition that came to be used in his theory of kingship. Now he called himself. He believed in divine theory of kingship. This is the first thing to know. Second thing is that he believed in the divine theory. So they can ask you, who of the following rulers of Delhi Sultanate believed in the divine theory of kingship? So it was Delhi Sultan Balban. Now, this divine theory of kingship, he called himself as the shadow of the God. Shadow of the God, that is Zil e Allah. You must have heard of this. That king is shadow of the God, and any disobedience to his order is akin to showing disobedience to the God, for which any punishment can be given and justified. So, believed in the divine theory of kingship. Then, this person also tried to present himself as the champion of the concept of justice, that he showed a degree, unprecedented degree of impartiality while dispensing justice, and even the highest dignitaries of the state were given the harshest possible punishment, even for the trivial offenses. Of course, trivial by the contemporary standard. We cannot apply our standard. And some people say that he was using the principle of justice just to eliminate his rivals. And who were his rivals? The remaining 39 nobles. Of those 40 nobles, he was one. Now he had become Sultan. So once he became Sultan, his approaches changed. Earlier, he wanted Sultan to be a puppet of the group, but now he started talking about the distinct or a special position of the Sultan, and he destroyed this group. He himself had been part of this, and he used all types of measures. He used diplomacy, he used treachery, he used assassinations, poisons, everything. But the question is, ki who created the group of 40? Iltutmish. During whose time conflict between Sultan and the group emerged on the surface? Razia Sultan. And who destroyed the group? The answer is Balban. So three things: Persian traditions, then divine theory of kingship, calling himself Zilli Allah. Third, a very uh, strict dispenser of justice. Fourth was discipline. He lived himself a very disciplined life in his court. No one was allowed to sit, and he was to. He always maintained decorum in the court, and never appeared in the lighter vein. Stopped drinking and all those kind of parties. And even when the dead body of his son was brought to the court, he remained unmoved. And that was simple. Sultan is not going to offer you any opportunity to console himself, because Sultan is different. You lesser beings, you keep away from the Sultan, keep yourself away from the Sultan. So he remained unmoved. That was the sense of his duty. Then in the discipline part, he also introduced some new practices which apparently were anti-Islamic. That he must have heard of something that is called sajda. Sajda in Islam is meant only for God, but he introduced sajda in the court. Sajda is also called sijda. Sijda in the court. In Islamic tradition, sijda is meant only for the God, but this Balban was introducing sijda in the court. And then there was one more tradition, and all inspired by the Persian tradition. That was pabos. S or SH. You can confirm it, but it hardly matters for PT. So Sijda and Pabos. Pabos was kissing the feet of the emperor. Now see to what extent, to what position he had reduced his nobles, that they had to offer Sijda and they had to kiss the feet of the emperor. So strict discipline. Then pomp and show. That was also important. Authority demands some sort of pomp and show. So he maintained huge bodyguards, all with naked swords, naked bodies, flexing muscles. Basically, he had to keep his friends away from him. He had been part of the group of 40, and now he did not want the group of 40 to interfere in his position. So these are the things about that person. That person is also known for suppressing the revolt of Mewatis, suppressing the revolt of Katehariya. Katehar was the area of western UP, Katehariya Rajputs, and a policy which is associated with him, that is known as policy of blood and iron. Blood and iron policy was again part of the same. That simply means problem may be of any nature, a solution is military. So that way we talk about Balban. Now with this we can shift to the next dynasty, and the next dynasty is the Khalji dynasty. Now in the Khalji dynasty, the first ruler is Jalaluddin Khalji. We are not going to talk about successors of Balban, but we can think of the chaos and disorder, and that was taken advantage of by Jalaluddin Khalji, who was the warden of the northwestern frontier areas, where the best of the commanders of the Delhi Sultanate were placed in order to face the Mongol invaders. So he came from that area and he occupied the throne. And perhaps the reign of Balban had witnessed too much blood shedding. So this person made a declaration that he does not want to harm even an ant. So that means who started pacifist policy in the Delhi Sultanate? Answer is Jalaluddin Khalji. And see, the person is saying that he does not want to harm even an ant. And you'll be surprised to know that he had thrown alive the last of the Delhi Sultans belonging to the Ilbari dynasty, Kaikubad, into the river Ganga. Sorry, Jamuna, that is near Delhi. So the methods to acquire power is different, and the methods to rule is different. So he pacifist policy. Then he also revived what we can say the concept of benevolent estate. Though he could not do anything concrete, but he revived the concept of benevolent estate of Harshvardhan, we can say, in the Delhi Sultanate, that he intended or he expressed his intention to rule for the benefits of the ruled. But his pacifism, that is his desire to not harming even an ant, and his benevolent despotism could not be expressed because very soon, within few years, he was killed by his nephew as well as son-in-law Alauddin Khalji, and with Alauddin Khalji, everything was going to change. As the chief architect of Delhi Sultanate, Alauddin Khalji is associated with certain developments. Now, there are certain developments which are associated with the entire Khalji period. For example, here context wise we can proceed. We have already seen those two, that is concept of benevolent estate, that was rejected by Alauddin Khilji. That was rejected by Alauddin Khalji. He was not like his uncle talking about benevolency. He was very clear in his mind, and that at times without expressing or without any justification. And his conduct shows that he ruled mainly in the interest of the, not in the interest of the subject, but in the interest of the estate. And then that pacifism was also abandoned. But there is one more thing that had started along with Jalaluddin Khalji, that was near separation of religion from the state. Near separation of religion from the state. Even Jalaluddin Khalji is known for making an observation that he see Hindus passing by his fort and singing, dancing, carrying their idols. And he says that he does not stop them or he does not try to stop them. So, whether he was able to stop them or not, that is not important. What is important is that he had no desire to stop them. So, it says, with Jalaluddin Khalji, we have beginning of 4 major tendencies. Out of those 4 major tendencies, 2 abandoned by Alauddin Khalji, but this near separation of religion, that was continued. And then there is one more tendency, that is social base of Delhi Sultanate. Social base of Delhi Sultanate now was going to be wide, because arrival of Khaljis on the throne of Delhi Sultanate amounted to the end of the Turkish monopoly of the power. Turkish monopoly had been established on the power by the sultans, beginning with Qutbuddin Aibak, then to some extent also Iltutmish, but most importantly Balban. Balban had been so racial that there is an observation about him that he says that whenever I see a person of low origin or ignoble, my body starts shivering with anger and my hands automatically reach my sword and I feel like cutting the person into the pieces. And what is the wrong committed by that person? That wrong committed much earlier by being born into a family of ignoble. So that kind of racial attitude we notice in case of the Delhi Sultans. That position was to change with the Khaljis on the throne. So Alauddin Khalji reversed the concept of benevolent state, pacifism, but he continued with the near separation of religion from the state, and the social base of Delhi Sultanate kept on widening under him also, and we have maximum expansion of the social base under the Tughlaqs. When Muhammad bin Tughlaq started appointing even the persons so-called untouchables of the time or very low and mean of the time, that is contemporary opinion, for which Barni is also criticizing Muhammad bin Tughlaq. as part of the nobility. So Alauddin Khalji continued with that. Now there are some statements, and this way we can keep on unfolding important aspects for us while talking about the Sultan. Now everything he is doing is military, based on his consolidation is based on military. Externally, he is not relying upon these things. His approach is a little different. So let us begin with his very famous remark that he made a change in the taxation. This is a story kind of thing. Some of you may be knowing. And that he changed the rate of hums. He changed the rate of hums. Khams, not s, hums. What was hums? So this was the share of estate. Share of estate in war booty. These terms may be important for you. War booty, part of loot and plunder. According to Islamic jurisprudence and Islamic theories, 1/5 belonged to the estate and 4/5 were divided among the soldiers. Now, this share of the soldiers, 4/5 of the war booty, provided additional motive to the mercenaries or the people who pretended themselves to be Ghazi, that as fighting for the Islam. Basically, they were interested in war booty. Now, what Alauddin Khilji did was that now 4/5 to the estate and only 1/5 to the soldiers. Now, against this, there was a revolt. Against this, there was a revolt, and that revolt was by the people who were known as New Musalmans. Why New Musalmans? Because they had been recently converted to Islam. Now, who were these people recently converted to Islam? So, they were the captured soldiers, Mongol soldiers. Who captured them? So, captured by Jalaluddin Khalji. He had been a very great warrior. They had got settled in Delhi and they had accepted Islam, and they came to be known as New Musalmans. So, Alauddin Khalji, when he changed the rate of khams, there was a revolt of New Musalmans. Now, when was this revolt of New Musalmans? So, when they were returning from Gujarat campaign. It means which was the first state to be conquered by Alauddin Khalji. So, the first state to be conquered as part of his expansion was Gujarat. Now, Alauddin Khalji was a very ambitious person, and he had a friend, Kotwal of Delhi, Alaul Mulk, and he shared some of his opinions with Alaul Mulk, and he says that, like Alexander, I just want to go on a course of the conquest of the whole world. Alaul Mulk was a little surprised, and then he asked who is going to manage the administration of Delhi. So he made an offer, meanwhile you administer Delhi and I am going on the course of conquest of the world. So he says, finally he persuaded not to do that. So he did not embark on the conquest of the world, but he assumed a title, Sikandar Sani. See, his desire for conquest. Sikandar Sani means like Alexander. So it was Alauddin Khalji. With this imperial attitude, he invaded Gujarat, and when soldiers were returning from Gujarat, there was a revolt of New Musalmans. We just discussed who were these New Musalmans and what was the factor behind their revolt. Now, this shows that he was not bound by the Islamic principles of taxation. Now, these New Musalmans took shelter with Rana Hamir Dev. You must have heard of. Some of them fled and took shelter with Hamir Dev, the ruler of Ranthambore, and that's why Alauddin Khalji invaded Ranthambore. So, second target of Alauddin Khalji. But Alauddin Khalji is particularly known for his South Indian campaigns. And South Indian campaigns were led by his famous commander Malik Kafur. Malik Kafur was a transgender purchased in 1000 dinar, so known as Hajar Dinari, from Khambhat when we have Gujarat. So this is one episode, that how he was not doing this. Then see, as part of his ambitions, he says that I want to found a new religion. Who? Alauddin Khalji. So who of the Delhi Sultan wanted to found a new religion? So it was Alauddin Khalji who wanted to found a new religion. And this desire he also expressed to his friend, the Kotwal of Delhi, Alaul Mulk. Now, founding a new religion in Islam is seen by the faithfuls as the worst crime one can commit. That is, challenging the position of the last prophet and what, according to Islam, is the last religion of the world. That is Islam itself. But see, this man was not being guided by religion. He says that he wants to found a new religion. Then Alaul Mulk tried to make him see reason, and he says that who is going to accept your religion? Then this person says, Ki, who will not accept my religion? See the attitude. I have four friends. He was referring to his four commanders. Their names may also be important. Malik Kafur, whom he entrusted with the South Indian campaigns. Zafar Khan, he died while fighting against the Mongols. He was so able and ambitious that even Alauddin Khalji was threatened. And it says, some people say, कि when he started chasing Mongols single-handedly, Alauddin Khilji did not send reinforcement. He just wanted this man to die, Zafar Khan. Then there is one more person whose name is Ulu Khan. These are four commanders, and Nusrat Khan. So he says, I have four brothers, I have four commanders, and with their help, I am going to force everyone to accept my religion. So this kind of determination he was showing. Now, for whatever expansion he was trying to do, that needed what we can say military establishment. So we know Balban had established a separate military department, but he reorganized it, and he maintained the largest standing army based on cash payment. Before this, soldiers were paid through iktas, again not hereditary. So who maintained the largest army on the basis of cash payment? It was this person, and also ensured the quality of the army by introducing some new practices like dag. Dag was branding of the horses, and chehra. Chehra was maintaining the description of the soldiers. It was like Aadhaar card of the time, so that no other person is sent and horses are not replaced by poor quality horses during the battle. Now this typical dag and chehra, these typical instruments to maintain the military efficiency later on came to be used also by Sher Shah and Akbar. So he wanted this military, that is called his military reforms. Military reforms were needed for his imperial expansion. Then for military, what was needed? Revenue. So he is known for his revenue reforms, and in his revenue reforms we have certain things which are very noticeable. For example, he imposed new taxes like ghari and charai. Ghari was house tax, charai was grazing tax. We have already noticed the changes made in khams. Moreover, he wanted direct connection with peasants because landed intermediaries were taking direct contact with the peasants, and that's why he destroyed the landed intermediaries. Those landed intermediaries are mentioned in the contemporary sources as khuts, mukaddams, and chaudhuris. So who were khut, mukaddams, and chaudhuris? They were landed intermediaries. They were destroyed by this person because this person wanted to establish direct contact with the peasants. Then he introduced a system of measurement of land that is known as masahat. So masahat introduced by Alauddin Khalji, and that was a system of measurement of land. Then here we have some more. As part of Iqtidari system, we talked about Khalsa. Khalsa was the area that was directly under the Sultan. So he expanded Khalsa. Expanding Khalsa means expanding the areas whose income belonged to directly to the central treasury. That was part of consolidating the finances of the state. And he also raised the rate of revenue, raised the rate of revenue, that is land revenue, to 50%. So these are some remarkable changes made by this person in the taxation system, introducing a new system of measurement of land, masahat, introducing new taxes like hari and charai, excluding the landed intermediaries, establishing direct contact with the peasants, and also raising the rate of revenue to 50%, that is one half of the total production, and and expansion of khalsa. But only increasing income was not enough. He also wanted to put a check on the expenditure, and from here we have what is known as his market control policy, that he fixed the prices of all the commodities and did not allow any kind of change in their prices so long as he lived. So we cannot go into the details of this market control mechanism, but who was the sultan who is known for market control policy? Alauddin Khalji. And what was this market control policy? So based on force, he fixed the prices of all commodities with some modern features also, like rationing system, that if the prices are fixed, it does not mean that you can buy as much as you want. Whether it was applied to Delhi only or throughout the empire, that is something debatable, but it appears that the market control policy was there in case of all the major cities where we have civilian population as well as the military population. Then this man is also known for his social reforms, that he banned liquor, prostitution, and also the intermarriages between the families of the nobles, because those things were seen as political alliances. In fact, he had appointed a commission, and the commission had recommended measures to put a check on the rebellious tendencies. So that was quite modern approach on his part, and he introduced those reforms mainly to put a check on the rebellious tendencies. So this much about Alauddin Khalji. His legacies, if we take note of, so we have socio-culture, his religious policy is part of this. Revenue we have discussed. Institutionally, of course, ICTA continued with its all uh, standard provisions. Military reorganized. So we have covered tacitly everything that is part of this. You can test it on your own. Now, after this person, we have Mubarak Khalji, and Mubarak Khalji is known for two reasons. First, changing the policy towards the Deccan or south. Alauddin Khalji had conquered, but he had not annexed those areas. This person started annexing. So he was more ambitious than his father, but was not having his abilities and political acumen or wisdom. So naturally, that was going to result in disaster. There is one more thing about this person, that he is the only Delhi Sultan who declared that he himself is the caliph. Other sultans were declaring their loyalty towards the caliph or maybe acquiring mansub from the caliph. But this person declared that he himself is the caliph. Then, after his death, and particularly due to the role played by Malik Kafur, the most notable commander, Alauddin Khalji, and after his death, his sons were most of the time killed. We have a person whose name was uh, Gyasuddin Tughlaq. I'm not recalling its previous name, but he became Sultan with this name. He was invited by the nobles, and like Jalaluddin Khalji, he too was posted in that area. That is the most disturbed area, northwestern areas. So he was invited. So he can be called an elected Sultan of Delhi by the nobles, of course, not elected by the people. And this person is known as known for some reasons. Perhaps he had a liberal policy towards the peasants, as he had Later on, Muhammad bin Tughlaq is going to raise the revenue to 50%. It means in the meantime, someone had reduced it. So, who reduced the rate of revenue? Perhaps enhanced by Alauddin Khalji, that was 50%. So, most probable answer is Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq. But this man is particularly known for his reconquest of Bengal and developing differences with the famous Sufi saint of Delhi, Nizamuddin Auliya, and that famous expression, that is Delhi dur hai, Hunuz Delhi dur ast, is associated with the conflict between this sultan and the famous Sufi of Delhi, whose name is Nizamuddin Auliya. So don't go into the details of this conflicting relation. Simply know that this person known for conquest of Bengal, and he also built the fort of Tughlaqabad. In case of Alauddin Khalji, architectural achievements just include one major thing, that is expansion of the Quwatul Islam Mosque that we have already discussed, and Alai Darwaza. Yes, in case of Alauddin Khalji, that was something that we had left. This person is known for Tughlaqabad Fort, Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq ka Maqbara, and a victory tower in celebration of the conquest of Bengal. But that is not important. Why this person is particularly important is that this person had some pro-peasant approach and is the first Delhi Sultan who dug canals. He had continued with the policy of annexation and now came to be succeeded by MBT Muhammad bin Tughlaq, whose childhood name was Jauna Khan, in whose honor later on Firoz Shah Tughlaq founded the famous city of Jaunpur in the eastern UP. Now Muhammad bin Tughlaq is very controversial ruler of Delhi Sultanate. He is known for some of his reforms. He was a man of genius, we can say, philosopher, thinker. He, the most, what we can say, liberal and Catholic ruler of Delhi Sultanate with Sufi inclination, and also became the first Sultan who visited the shrine of Ajmer. During his time, we have arrival of the famous foreign traveler Ibn Battuta, in whose book Kitab-e-Rehla we find some details related to the city of Delhi and also to the personal conduct of the Sultan. Now, this man is remembered as Pagla because of some failure of some of his experiments. And if we count those experiments, we have this transfer of capital from Delhi to Daulatabad, and we have different kind of descriptions. But one thing we have to accept, if the question is based on assertion and reasoning, that it was mainly due to political necessity. As the empire had reached its territorial zenith, Barni, who was quite hostile towards Muhammad bin Tughlaq, writes that the revenue accounts of Madurai were scrutinized in Delhi. So naturally, such a big empire needed a second capital. But when the empire disintegrated, there was no need, so he came back. Second important experiment with which he is associated is the token currency. That was perhaps the impact of worldwide silver crisis. Again, this failed. Third, that he raised taxes in the Doab region, and that led to an agrarian revolt. So he developed a separate department for agricultural development later on, that is known as Diwane Amir Kohi. And he divided the Doab areas in developmental circles and made advance payments to officers for extending facilities to the peasants. That also included, this is important, facility of Takavi, that is agricultural loan. So he was the first sultan who extended the agricultural loan to the peasants. But then again, there was revolt against him. Then Karachi and Khurasan expeditions he planned. That by this time Delhi sultans had become so powerful that they were trying to capture the breeding grounds of Mongol invasions. But even this plan failed. Everything failed in his case. And Badayuni, a writer who is writing the history of Sultanate while living in the time of Akbar much later on, writes that with his death, his subjects were freed from him and vice versa. That उसकी मौत के साथ ही लोगों को उससे और उसको लोगों से मुक्ति मिल गई. And after that, we have Firoz Shah Tughlaq on the throne of Delhi. We can say the last major sultan of Delhi, जिसके बारे में कुछ पढ़ा लिखा जा सकता है. But this person is known for his orthodox religious policy. इसने उलेमास के लिए बहुत कुछ किया. He is particularly known for his contribution to architecture, and you must be knowing Ashokan pillars. He brought those Ashokan pillars to Delhi. He also ordered burning of a Brahman alive, Brahman of Mathura, on the charges of what is called blasphemy. So, orthodox ruler. He is also known for his taxation reforms, that he abolished all the taxes except four taxes permitted by Islam, like kharaj, khams, jizya, and zakat. So he started appropriating jizya separately from the kharaj. So if the question is who appropriated jizya in the case of Delhi Sultanate as a separate tax, it was this ruler. But this ruler is also known for reviving the concept of welfare state. He says that I don't believe in conquest. I don't want to shed the Muslim blood. So he revived the concept of welfare state, but his charity was mainly confined to the old ruling families, that is, old nobles. Then he is also known for some innovative steps like unemployment bureau or employment bureau was also established by him. But whatever he did not support the crumbling structure of Delhi Sultanate. Rather, we have further weaknesses because he made compromises. Dag and Chehra abandoned. Decentralizing tendencies were also not checked by him. So finally, his role is not in strengthening the Delhi Sultanate, but in facilitating or expediting the decline of Delhi Sultanate, though he was thinking that he is defending his position. But his time was of peace and prosperity. He himself was an entrepreneur. He continued with the agricultural experiments of Muhammad bin Tughlaq. He had many gardens. He had particular fondness for the slaves, and those slaves were trained in different kind of activities and employed in the royal workshops. Sayyids are not important, but the invasion of Timur that we discussed 1398 had taken place during Nasiruddin Tughlaq, and about him you must have heard of. It is said, and that is said about others also, that the reign of Shah Jahan is from Delhi to Palam. So first perhaps told in case of Nasiruddin Mahmud. Then Sayyids not important. Among Lodhis we have Bahlol Lodhi, and Lodhis were Afghans. But then again there is nothing very much remarkable except con- except tribal theories that he never occupied the throne because in the Afghan traditions a sultan was one among equals. But his son Sikandar Lodi started centralizing tendencies, who is also known for founding the city of Agra. But he was a talented person who survived. But this attempt towards centralization, when made by his son and successor Ibrahim Lodi, infuriated the nobles, and some of them, including relatives like Alam Khan, who was his uncle, approached Babar, and some rivals of Delhi Sultanate like Rana Sanga of Mewar also approached him, and the result was the first battle of Panipat, in which Ibrahim Lodi died fighting against Babar. Babar had very poor opinion about his military capabilities, but he respects him as a warrior in his Babarnama, that he did not leave the battlefield, he died, and following the tradition of the time, he was buried in the battlefield. That was a mark of honor. So with this, there was an end to the Sultanate. Let us end the class also. I hope this has helped you in the revision part. Thank you so much for this cooperation.